Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're the place that takes really dense academic stuff and, well, turns it into the knowledge you actually need.
That's the goal.
And today, we are diving deep, really deep. We're going to deconstruct the sociology of gender.
Yeah, it's a big one. We're looking at everything from its history, which frankly involved outright exclusion, all the way to how we can use these ideas to understand something really persistent today, like the global wage gap.
It's a major journey, intellectually speaking.
It is, and it's crucial because we're essentially tracking how a whole field of study starts to correct itself, how it moves, from ignoring people to actually centering them.
So it's about the evolution of thought pushed by activism.
Exactly. Activism forcing a kind of academic honesty. It's a fascinating story, really.
And the story, or at least our starting point for this dive, comes from this pretty dramatic anecdote in our source material. You have to picture it. 1968, sociologist Cynthia Fuchs Epstein stands up at the American Sociological Association meeting, the ASA. Big deal. And she proposes they formally address discrimination against women.
Okay. And the reaction?
Just laughter. Dismissive laughter from this, well, mostly male assembly.
Wow. That moment, it just says it all, doesn't it? It perfectly highlights why this deep dive is so important.
Right.
That laughter wasn't just rude, it was the sound of institutional bias. Here's a field dedicated to studying society, basically laughing off the concerns of half the population, not even counting others pushed to the margins.
Yeah, exactly. So our mission today is to track that shift. How did sociology go from that laughter to a place that tries to center multiple viewpoints, intersectional ones?
And we'll use our sources to do it. They trace this whole path, historical moments, the big foundational theories, the newer contemporary ideas.
And then we apply it all. We take this toolkit we've built and use it to look at that really stubborn problem, the gender wage gap.
Right. But first, to really grasp why this change was so desperately needed, we need to look at the hard data that came out shortly after that 1968 incident.
Okay.
The sources point to this 1970 Women's Caucus statement. This was put together by over 200 feminist scholars who were just done. They'd had enough.
And the numbers they presented are pretty shocking, right?
Yeah.
They really show a system that was fundamentally exclusionary.
Staggering is the word. They found that 67%, two-thirds, of women graduate students in sociology back then had never had a single senior-rank woman professor.
Yeah.
In their entire training.
Think about that. The lack of mentors, different perspectives, just validation. You're training for a career where the top looks nothing like you.
And it wasn't just about professors. It was the power structure of the ASA itself.
Yeah, the statement pointed out a total lockout, didn't it?
Complete shutout. In 1970, 0 women on the ASA Council. 0 women as associate editors for the top journals, the American Sociological Review, the American Journal of Sociology. 0 women on the really key committees like publications and nominations.
0. Across the board.
So this collective action, spurred by this just total exclusion, immediately led to something concrete.
Which was?
The formation of Sociologists for Women in Society, SWS. A professional group pushing for feminist sociology, for social justice, and really aiming to change the academy itself.
Okay, so that resistance, that collective action, sets the stage. Before we dive into the actual theories, let's pin down a definition. What exactly is feminism in this academic context?
Right. Our sources define it as an interdisciplinary approach. That's key. It looks at equality and equity based on gender, gender expression, identity, sex, sexuality.
Okay.
And it understands these things through social theories and political activism. It's not just about thinking, it's about doing. And it insists on including voices that were shut out before women, yes, but also people of the global majority, disabled people, LGBTQIA+ folks.
So it's applying sociological tools, but with a built-in push for justice and inclusion.
Exactly. It's an intellectual project fundamentally rooted in achieving justice.
All right, so we have the context. This field needed a major correction. Pushed by activists demanding knowledge actually reflect, well, everyone. To get how that correction happened, we need the basic tools sociologists use. Let's talk about the 2 main levels of analysis, macro and micro.
Right. These are fundamental. They just dictate the scope, the zoom level of your research. Microsociology is the close-up lens.
Studying small groups, individual interactions.
Exactly. How people behave face-to-face, how they create meaning together. Think about observing a family dinner or a team meeting.
Like, how do they decide who's in charge in that specific conversation, or who counts as family, stuff like that?
Precisely. Macrosociology, then, is the wide-angle shot. It looks at the big picture. Large systems, the economy, the government, the criminal justice system.
And how these big systems interact with each other or with individuals on a large scale.
Yeah. So a macro question might be, how does national immigration policy affect unemployment rates across different racial groups?
Big scale stuff. Okay, got it. But as we said, the knowledge coming from both macro and micro perspectives in the mid-20th century was, well, flawed. Deeply flawed.
Which leads us directly to a really powerful contribution from feminist theory, standpoint theory.
Because the existing theories were incomplete.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The critique was simple but devastating. If you consistently exclude the perspectives, the standpoints of women and people of the global majority, your theories can't be fully objective. They're missing crucial information.
Hold on, that's a big claim that the marginalized standpoint is potentially more objective. How does that work? Isn't that just swapping one bias for another?
That's the genius of it, really. The core argument from theorists like Dorothy Smith or Nancy Hartsock is that knowledge is always socially situated. It comes from somewhere.
Okay.
The dominant group, historically, white, male, wealthy, their position often insulates them. The system works for them, so they don't necessarily have the incentive or even the need to see its flaws or understand how it affects others negatively. Their view is inherently limited by that privilege.
They see their part of the world and assume it's the whole world.
You got it. Whereas marginalized people, let's take the example our sources use, a transgender black woman, to navigate a world built on, as the sources say, rampant sexism and androcentrism. She has to understand the rules of the dominant group and how those rules impact her specifically.
She needs to see both sides, a kind of double vision.
A double consciousness, exactly. It's a necessary survival skill, which also becomes an intellectual advantage. So standpoint theory argues we need to seek out these lived experiences not just for fairness, but for accuracy.
Because that specific knowledge from the margins is crucial to understanding the whole system, not just the bit that benefits the powerful.
Right. It flips the script. The marginalized aren't just people to be studied. Their perspective is an essential tool for knowing, a tool the dominant group often lacks.
Okay, that's a powerful idea. And it sets us up perfectly to look at the three big sociological paradigms that feminist thinkers had to confront.
Right. These were the main frameworks floating around in the mid-20th century. The blueprints, basically.
Let's start with the first one, structural functionalism, macro level.
Functionalism. Its main obsession is order, stability, equilibrium.
And the classic analogy is the human body, right?
Yeah.
Society as a system of interconnected parts working together.
Exactly. Education, family, economy, they're like the body's organs, each with a function contributing to the whole system's health. It draws a lot from Durkheim, a bit from Weber, but really focuses on that stability aspect.
So when functionalists looked at gender, what was their big question?
It was basically, what does gender do for society? Is the traditional division of labor, the gender binary, somehow necessary for keeping society stable and running smoothly?
And for a long time, they basically said yes, didn't they? Using it to justify things like the 1950s nuclear family model.
They did. They argued those distinct roles, man as the instrumental breadwinner, woman as the expressive caregiver, were functional. Minimized conflict, ensured kids were raised, society stayed stable. It made social change seem, well, unnecessary or even harmful.
But the critique here is pretty strong. It feels static.
It is.
Yeah.
That's a major critique. It doesn't explain social change very well. If everything's functional, why do things change? And more fundamentally, it makes this logical leap, assuming that just because something exists, it must be serving a positive function.
Right. Like, does poverty serve a function? Does racism?
Exactly. When you apply it that way, it ends up just justifying the status quo, justifying inequality by labeling it functional or necessary, even if it causes huge problems for lots of people.
Okay, so that focus on structure and order leads us to the second big paradigm, which is kind of its opposite. Conflict theory, also macro.
Right. If functionalism is about harmony, conflict theory is all about struggle. It comes straight out of Marx, fundamentally.
Class struggle, owners versus workers.
That was the original focus, yeah. But the core idea is broader. Conflict is the basic reality of social life. Institutions, government, schools, the economy, they aren't neutral. They're set up to benefit the powerful, usually at the expense of others.
And later theorists, especially feminist and critical race theorists, saw this framework could apply beyond just class.
Absolutely. They expanded it to analyze struggles over masculine dominance, white supremacy. It became a crucial tool. Think of Harriet Martineau looking at gender conflict way back, or W.E.B. Du Bois meticulously documenting the Black experience to show systemic racial conflict. They use this lens.
So functionalists see shared values as glue holding society together. Conflict theorists see them differently, right? This ideology trap.
Exactly. Conflict theorists are deeply skeptical of widely shared values, like, say, the American dream.
The idea that anyone can make it if they just work hard enough.
Right. They see that as an ideology, a system of beliefs that actually deceives people. It makes the system seem fair, justifies the success of those already on top, and encourages people who aren't succeeding to blame themselves, not the systemic barriers.
So it masks the real power dynamic.
Precisely. It keeps people from questioning the structure itself.
Okay, that's macro conflict. Now, let's zoom way into the micro level with the third paradigm, symbolic interactionist theory.
Interactionism. This one's all about meaning-making in everyday life, mostly associated with the Chicago School, figures like Herbert Blumer.
And the core idea is,
Humans act based on the meanings they assign to things, people, objects, situations. Meaning isn't inherent. It's created and shared through interaction.
so if I label someone friend versus stranger, my actions toward them change completely based on that meaning I've assigned.
Exactly. And that meaning isn't fixed. It's constantly being negotiated and potentially modified in every interaction.
How does this apply to gender?
It shows us how gender isn't just some biological fact, but something we actively do. We learn gender norms, perform them, reinforce them, maybe even challenge them in our daily interactions. It's about how we construct gendered selves together.
It's really useful for understanding identity formation in small groups then.
Definitely. But it has its own limitations, its own critique.
Bitches.
By focusing so tightly on those micro-interactions, it often struggles to explain the big structural stuff. Like, how do you explain global inequality just by looking at face-to-face conversations?
Right.
And, critically, it can sometimes downplay the impact of those larger systems of power and oppression, sexism, racism, classism, that shape the context within which those interactions happen.
So feminism ultimately needed something that could bridge that gap, connect the macro structures with the micro interactions.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
It needed to synthesize the insights from all these approaches, but through a lens that centered those who had been ignored.
Which brings us to the historical development, the waves of feminist activism and theory.
Exactly. This wasn't just academics sitting in rooms. The theory evolved because people were fighting for change and demanding the theory reflect their realities. The lens kept getting wider.
Let's start with the first wave, mid-19th century up to about 1920.
Right. The main focus here, for the dominant group within the movement at least, was formal legal equality, getting basic rights within the existing system.
So things like suffrage, the right to vote, that was huge.
Absolutely. The 19th Amendment. Also, striking down coverture laws, the old laws where a married woman basically became her husband's property, legally speaking.
Wow.
And fighting for access to education, to jobs, things laid out way back at the Seneca Falls Convention in 1848.
But even in this early wave, there were significant internal conflicts, particularly around race, weren't there?
Critically important conflicts. You had white, middle-class activists, many involved in the abolition movement, drawing parallels between marriage under coverture and chattel slavery.
Like Antoinette Brown in 1853 saying a wife owed service like a slave.
Yeah. And the critique, which is still relevant, is that this comparison, while maybe well-intentioned, really blurred the lines. It confused the legal subjugation white women faced with the unique, brutal, racialized, lifelong horror of chattel slavery. They weren't the same thing.
That must have made things incredibly complex for Black women leaders who were fighting on multiple fronts. How did someone like Ida B. Wells navigate that?
Wells was, frankly, brilliant, a strategist and a meticulous researcher. She focused on documenting the specific harms that the white-centered movement often ignored. Her work on lynching wasn't just about individual crimes.
She showed it was systematic, right? Economic and political terror.
Exactly. A tool to maintain racial hierarchy. She used data, investigation. She founded Black women's clubs, was a founder of the NAACP. She understood that race and gender oppression were intertwined and refused to let the fight for racial justice be sidelined.
Her work really underscores that intersectional approach, even back then.
Absolutely.
Okay, so that sets us up for the second wave, mid-20th century. And this one was heavily influenced by the civil rights movement.
Hugely influenced. The civil rights movement provided the playbook in many ways. The tactics, mass marches, nonviolent protests, forming caucuses like the women did at the ASA.
They adapted those strategies.
Right. And this is when feminist sociology really takes off. Scholars finally started using the tools of social science to research and theorize the actual lived experiences of women experiences totally ignored by the male-dominated field before then.
But like the first wave, the second wave also faced internal critiques about its own exclusions, didn't it?
It did. The movement often centered the experiences and priorities of white, middle-class heterosexual women, inadvertently reproducing some of the very inequalities it claimed to fight.
So what came out of that critique?
A really crucial self-critical shift. You see the rise of multiracial feminist organizations and an explosion of incredibly important scholarship from women of the global majority. Think of landmark anthologies like This Bridge Called My Back.
And this is where someone like Patricia Hill Collins becomes so central, her work on Black feminist thought.
Yes, Collins powerfully articulated that idea we discussed earlier, standpoint theory, that the knowledge needed for liberation resides with those who are marginalized.
Because they have that unique perspective, that double consciousness.
Right. She argued that liberatory theory must be centered on their lived experiences because they see the system's mechanics most clearly. It's about replacing the oppressive definitions imposed by the dominant culture with self-defined knowledge. For her, the political struggle and the creation of theory were inseparable.
Okay. Which leads us naturally into the third wave, starting around the 1990s and continuing today. This seems much more explicitly inclusive.
Definitely. The third wave embraces that complexity. It includes specific standpoints. Black feminism, Chicana feminism, transnational feminism, disability justice, queer theory, focusing on LGBTQIA+ experiences. It's much more intentionally intersectional.
And a key strategy here is a thing called coalitional politics. How is that different from earlier organizing?
It's a significant shift. Instead of organizing primarily around a single shared identity like women, which sometimes led to excluding people within that group.
Right, the oppression Olympics critique.
Exactly. Coalitional politics focuses on building alliances across different identities based on shared experiences of oppression. You might have different histories or cultures, but you find common ground in fighting overlapping systems of power.
The sources mention an example, Freedom Inc.
Yeah, in Madison, Wisconsin. A nonprofit organizing Black and H-moved communities together. They face different specific issues, maybe, but share experiences of marginalization and build collective power through that coalition. It's about solidarity across difference.
Alongside this, we get transnational feminism. What's the specific focus there?
Transnational feminism, pushed by thinkers like Chandra Telpade Mohanty, insists we look globally. It connects the dots between sexism, racism, classism, and imperialism on a world scale.
So it critiques forms of feminism that are too focused on, say, just North America.
Yes. Mohanty specifically calls out Western feminism that ignores the realities faced by women in the global South, or worse, engages in these problematic saving projects.
The idea of Western feminists needing to rescue women elsewhere.
Right. Mohanty argues these projects often construct women in the global South as passive victims, stripping them of their own agency and history of resistance, especially when it gets tied up with Western economic or military goals. The third wave demands a more complex, globally accountable feminism that respects everyone's agency.
Okay, that brings us up to the really contemporary theories, growing out of this third wave complexity. These seem to push even further on how we understand identity and gender itself.
They really do. But before we jump into the specific theories, we need a little philosophical grounding. Back to Simone de Beauvoir, 1949.
Her famous line, "One is not born, but rather becomes a woman."
Exactly. Gender isn't just biology. It's something we learn, something society constructs. It's a process of becoming.
And this idea introduced that critical concept of the subject-object divide.
Right. De Beauvoir observed that, socially speaking, men are often positioned as the default subject, the norm, the active agent, the one doing things.
While women are constructed as the other, the object.
Often, yes. Defined in relation to the male norm, positioned as the passive one being acted upon. It sets up this fundamental power imbalance where one group has agency and the other is defined by their lack of it or by their relation to the subject.
This othering, making someone fundamentally different from the self, has deep psychological roots too, doesn't it? Which connects to Julia Kristeva and abjection.
Yes, abjection is a fascinating and, frankly, disturbing concept. Kristeva describes it as that visceral reaction, horror, disgust, maybe even feeling sick.
To things that threaten the boundaries of the self, like seeing gore or bodily waste, things that remind us we're fragile, maybe?
Exactly. Things that blur the line between me and not me, inside and outside. It's a primal boundary protection mechanism.
Okay, but how does that primal physical reaction get applied to social difference? How do we learn to feel that about other people?
That's the crucial link socialization makes. Abjection gets weaponized. When a person or an identity challenges the rigid social categories we've learned, like the gender binary or racial hierarchies, the challenge can trigger the same psychological defense mechanism, the
Yeah.
same feeling of horror or revulsion as a physical threat.
So, seeing someone who doesn't fit neatly into a box can feel unconsciously like a threat to one's own sense of self and order.
It can. The sources connect this learned response to the horrific levels of violence faced by those who transgress these social boundaries.
Like this statistic about trans people being 4 times more likely to be victims of violent crime.
Exactly. That statistic makes the theory feel terrifyingly concrete. It suggests that part of this violence stems from a deep-seated, learned revulsion to difference, an abject horror at the not me that needs to be consciously unlearned.
Wow, okay, that's a heavy foundation. Let's move to the first of the 4 contemporary theories building on this, post-structuralism.
Post-structuralism really aims to destabilize fixed meanings and structures. It grew out of critiques of earlier structuralism, which sometimes presented cultures as these rigid, unchanging systems, often from a, frankly, colonial perspective that ignored the agency of marginalized people.
So instead of fixed structures, post-structuralism looks at how things are constantly being made and remade.
Precisely. Especially through language and performance, it asks. How is gender constructed? How is it reproduced? How is it enforced? But also, how is it challenged and transformed?
Yeah. And Judith Butler's work is key here, right? Gender as performance.
Absolutely. Butler argues gender isn't some inner essence we have, but something we do continuously through our actions, our speech, our style. It's an ongoing performance. This idea radically deconstructs the gender binary and opens up space for understanding gender as a spectrum, as fluid.
Okay. Theory number 2, queer theory. This is more than just about LGBTQIA plus identities, isn't it? It's a critical framework.
It definitely is. Queer theory provides tools for understanding gender and sexuality outside of the dominant heterosexual cisgender norms. Its main target is heteronormativity.
Which is the assumption that being straight and cisgender is the default, the normal way to be.
Yeah, exactly, and that anything else is a deviation. Queer theory actively critiques this assumption at all levels.
Macro and micro.
Both. Macro level, it looks at laws, policies, cultural representations, how marriage laws or media portrayals reinforce heteronormativity. Micro level, it examines how individuals form their identities in relation to these norms, how they negotiate them with family and friends, how they resist or conform in everyday life. It challenges the very idea of fixed identity categories.
Okay. Next up, crip theory and disability justice. This seems closely related to challenging norms about the body.
Very much so. Crip theory takes that post-structural idea about embodiment and pushes it further. It demands that society not just tolerate, but actively accommodate and affirm the full wide spectrum of human bodies, all shapes, all abilities, all ways of feeling and being in a body.
And like queer theory, it reclaims a term that was used as an insult, crip.
Yes, reclaiming crip is a political act, signaling solidarity, strength, and a rejection of shame. It's about challenging ableism, the discrimination and prejudice against people with disabilities.
Which is often tied up with ideas about productivity, independence.
Exactly. Crip theory critiques society's obsession with able-bodiedness and independence. It points out that interdependence needing each other is a fundamental human reality, not a failure. When society shames or excludes people whose bodies require interdependence, it's often because it threatens that illusion of perfect self-sufficiency that many hold on to.
And the real-world consequences of ableism, the material harms, are significant.
They are stark. The sources highlight data like nearly 48% of incarcerated women having a disability, and the wage gap. Disabled people earning only 74 cents for every dollar earned by non-disabled people, with even bigger gaps for disabled people of color.
So disability justice is about addressing those harms and valuing interdependence.
Yes, celebrating all forms of embodiment and recognizing our mutual reliance.
Finally, our 4th contemporary lens, post-colonial theory. This brings us back to that global perspective.
Right. Developed primarily by scholars from former European colonies, mostly in the global south. It examines the ongoing, lasting impacts of colonialism.
How colonization didn't just steal land and resources, but also fundamentally disrupted social structures, including gender.
Exactly. Colonizers often imposed European, racialized, binary ideas about gender onto cultures that had very different, sometimes non-binary systems already in place. And post-colonial theory argues this isn't just history. The current global economy operates as a form of neocolonialism.
Neocolonialism, how is that different from the old version?
Old colonialism was direct rule military, political control. Neocolonialism is more indirect, primarily economic. It's controlled through things like debt, unfair trade agreements, the exploitation of cheap labor and resources. Powerful nations maintain dominance over less powerful ones economically, rather than through direct political occupation.
And women, particularly in the global south, often bear the brunt of this neocolonial system.
Disproportionately so. Their labor is often exploited in global supply chains, their resources extracted, their traditional roles disrupted. Post-colonial theory helps us see those global power dynamics.
Okay, wow. We have built quite the toolkit now. From macro-micro basics through the foundational paradigms, the waves of activism, and these powerful contemporary lenses like crip theory and post-colonialism.
It's a lot, yeah.
So now's the time to put it to work. Let's apply this whole framework to understand that persistent, infuriating issue, the gender wage gap.
Right, and the data is the starting point. It shows the system is still failing. 2022 numbers. Women working full-time, year-round, earned 84 cents for every dollar paid to men.
But that 84 cents figure hides deeper inequalities, doesn't it? Our intersectional toolkit demands we break that down.
Absolutely. Compare earnings to white, non-Hispanic men. Black women earned just 69 cents on that dollar. Hispanic women earned only 57 cents. It's not one gap. It's multiple overlapping gaps, showing how race and gender compound disadvantage.
So let's start with the foundational theories. How does structural functionalism, even with its flaws, help explain why this gap persists?
Well, from a functionalist view, the gap persists because underlying cultural values still reinforce that traditional division of labor, even if we have laws against discrimination now.
So the laws change, but the deeper beliefs about who should do what kind of work lag behind.
Kind of. They'd argue these anti-discrimination laws don't really tackle the root norms that lead to occupational segregation.
Occupational segregation, that's the macro level pattern where men and women are concentrated in different types of jobs, right?
Exactly. And it leads directly to what are often called pink-collar jobs.
Jobs like childcare, nursing, teaching, administrative support, customer service.
Right. Jobs disproportionately held by women, often seen as extensions of natural female roles, and crucially, almost always lower paid than male-dominated fields requiring similar skill levels. That's the macro structure.
Okay, now bring in symbolic interactionism. How does the micro-level meaning-making keep wages down within those segregated jobs, or even in integrated ones?
Interactionism looks at how stereotypes play out in real time. In a performance review, for instance, the same behavior being assertive, taking initiative, might be interpreted differently based on gender.
So a man doing it is a leader, go-getter. A woman doing the same thing is bossy, difficult, not a team player.
Exactly. Those gendered meanings, assigned in micro-interactions, directly impact promotions, raises, and contribute to the wage gap. It's the subtle everyday bias.
And a key feature of many of these pink-collar jobs is something called emotional labor. That sounds exhausting.
It is. Arlie Hochschild coined the term. It's work that requires you to manage your own feelings and actively manage the feelings of others as part of the job.
Like the flight attendant smiling through turbulence or the call center worker staying calm while being yelled at.
Precisely. You have to suppress your genuine emotional reactions and perform the right emotion for the customer or client. It's real work, often stressful work, vital for the business, but it's rarely recognized or compensated adequately in the wage.
Because it's seen as just part of being a woman or something?
Often, yeah. It gets naturalized and devalued. And this labor often comes with physical costs, too.
Which brings us back to embodiment and crip theory's insights.
Millian Kang's research on nail technicians is a powerful example here. They perform intense emotional labor, being a confidant, managing client expectations, but they also perform physical body labor, detailed manual work, massage.
And the health risks.
Huge risks. Constant exposure to toxic chemicals in nail products, significantly higher rates of cancer, respiratory problems, skin conditions. They are literally sacrificing their health for low wages, doing work that involves both emotional and physical strain.
And beyond paid work, we absolutely have to talk about the massive unpaid gap.
Oh, absolutely. This is crucial. Over 75% of all unpaid care work globally, looking after kids, elderly parents, disabled family members, is done by women.
Work that keeps society functioning but isn't counted in GDP.
Exactly. Economist Nancy Folber points out it's systematically undervalued because it's stereotyped as women's work, something done out of love, not for economic value. This unpaid burden drastically limits women's ability to participate fully in the paid workforce, reduces their lifetime earnings, impacts their retirement savings. It's a huge driver of the overall gender wealth gap.
Okay, finally, let's use our global wises. Post-colonial and transnational theories. How do they frame the wage gap as a global issue?
They show it's not just happening within rich countries, it's structured globally. Post-colonial theory connects the lower pay for women in the global south directly to the legacies of colonialism and the current dynamics of neocolonialism, how resources and cheap labor are extracted for the benefit of the global north.
So the exploitation is baked into the global economic system.
Right. And transnational feminism highlights how women, especially migrant women, are often forced into precarious, low-paid service work in wealthier countries precisely because of these global inequalities.
They become mobile workers in that pink-collar sector we talked about, often highly vulnerable.
Extremely vulnerable, especially if they're undocumented. Working in unregulated sectors like domestic work or agricultural labor, facing exploitation with little recourse.
And this leads to phenomena like transnational motherhood.
Yes, it's a heartbreaking consequence. Women leaving their own children behind in their home countries to earn money caring for the children of wealthier families in other countries. The economic pressures created by global inequality force these impossible choices, separating families. It shows the deep human cost of these gendered, globalized economic structures.
So applying all these theories reveals the wage gap isn't just one simple number. It's this complex knot of historical biases, ongoing discrimination in interactions, structural segregation, undervalued labor, paid and unpaid, and global exploitation.
Exactly. It requires a multi-layered analysis to even begin to understand it.
What a journey. We've gone from that dismissive laughter back in 1968
Yeah.
all the way through these intricate theories that help us unpack something as complex as the global wage gap. It really shows how the academy had to change, pushed by the voices it tried to ignore.
Absolutely. The core message, really, from the sociology of gender is this powerful refutation. Gender and sexuality are not simply biological, not fixed, not binary, not destiny. They are socially constructed, lived, performed, and contested.
We've seen how those early flawed paradigms got challenged, how feminist activism demanded more inclusive theories, leading to things like standpoint theory, queer theory, crip theory, post-colonialism.
A much richer, more complex, and ultimately more accurate way of understanding the social world.
So for you, the listener, the big takeaway is that you now have this amazing toolkit. You can see things through different lenses, from the macro-level conflicts down to the micro-level interactions,
Right.
from understanding standpoint to recognizing objection or neocolonial structures.
It's a way to analyze almost any social issue, really, to see the systemic patterns beneath the surface events.
Which brings us to our final provocative thought for you to chew on. We heard from post-colonial theory how European colonization actively disrupted existing social arrangements in many parts of the world, imposing Western binary gender norms, sometimes onto cultures that had more fluid or non-binary understanding.
Right. That imposition had devastating, long-lasting consequences.
We've spent today analyzing the ongoing costs, economic, social, personal, of that imposed binary system, particularly through the wage gap and things like transnational motherhood. Now, combine that with Patricia Hill Collins's core idea
That the knowledge needed to dismantle oppressive systems often lies with those who are marginalized by them.
Exactly. So here's the question. If the knowledge for dismantling these harmful systems lies with the marginalized, and if colonization actively suppressed diverse, non-binary gender systems that often valued interdependence differently, what transformative insights might we gain socially, politically, economically if global scholarship made a serious, systematic effort to center research and theory based on those pre-colonial, non-binary gender standpoints? What could we learn from recovering and valuing those suppressed ways of knowing?
That's a really powerful question to end on. What knowledge have we lost, and what can we regain?